Good morning, my beautiful friends. I always call my friends now, which would be hopefully my listeners or subscribers to my YouTube channel and my podcast. I call you my patient friends because I always ask for patience while I'm navigating through learning how to have a podcast and have a YouTube channel. And so I'm glad that I have learned a little bit more about editing tools because, being able to cut out the silences in my thinking, because having the ADD and part of my navigating, learning how to better think of how to word this, organize my thoughts, and then I've got to work on organizing my thoughts when I'm talking. I mean, when you don't have a YouTube channel, or if you're not trying to have a podcast, it's difficult to probably work with those things because unless you work in a job that you have to do a lot of talking. But see, the thing is if you do have a job, I just had one of those aha moments. I love those, except that they are basically like me distracting myself with my own thoughts. But because I was saying that other people who may have ADD and they work in a job where they are very actively talking, like talking is a part of their job, like customer service on the phone, or you're a salesperson, or you just any job, that you have meetings all the time and you're having, or like leadership roles. Because yes, people who have ADD, some of the smartest people in the world have ADD. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, but I will say that, you're right. See, I'm already doing it. See, I'm medicated. This is why I say managing ADD is more than just taking the medication, because even though I want to focus on my speech, my medication is not going to kick in to give me the focus I need to speak clearly without interrupting myself. What it does is it does help give me focus. It helps give me the ability to make that dopamine we need to focus when we need it, but it also functions to buffer hyperfocus. But if anybody listening to this has ADD, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say hyperfocus. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And so when you are in hyperfocus on something that you love, usually hyperfocus comes when we're doing things we love. And that's not usually chores. Unless you love chores. Then you can get hyper-focused on cleaning your whole house and not want to stop. I wish I had that, but I don't. But, see, I've already seen, this is why I'm doing my ADD vlog diaries. This is number 2, by the way. No, this is number 3. Today, I'm going to work on finishing editing yesterday's number 2, so I can post that by tonight. I'll be like a day behind, just because I'm trying to juggle this along with working full time, and time management is something that people with ADD struggle with, period. But it is one of the hardest ever things for me to do. So it's something I have to work a lot with. So now in my brain, I'm trying to rewind to where I veered off and come back for you guys. So I think it's that aha moment that I veered from. I distracted myself from I am my own worst enemy. Okay. So my aha moment was that someone who makes a living speaking, whatever that looks like, you know, you could just be a supervisor anywhere or a manager anywhere, so you're always having to be talking to your people and organizing and whatever. But the reason why I probably struggle as much as I do with speaking without, like, with clarity and not jumping around from one thing, and like my mind wouldn't distract me as much as it does for people who work in jobs, you know, because naturally, 40 hours a week, most people work full time, and 40 hours a week, you know, that's a lot of time to be, you know, a lot of time out of your life. So I work in a profession where I have not had to talk in great lengths to other, well, it's not that I don't have to talk to other people. I'm a lab tech, so a lot of what I do is like, I'm going to use this as an example or as an analogy. I try to use analogies when I can because not everybody knows what a lab tech does. So me trying to say, like, you know, oh, my profession does not require a lot of talking. You may be like, well, how do I know that? Yeah, that internal an internet-based job. Maybe you have an online store. So all you do is fill orders and you're not having to communicate with people a lot. So I feel like that might be a contributing factor to why I may struggle sometimes with keeping my focus on my speech and not getting so distracted. Maybe, I don't know. But since this is going to be recorded as a ADD vlog diary for my YouTube channel, I'm gonna be my own worst enemy right now. But for anyone who is going to watch my YouTube channel, my first video that I just posted last night, I haven't shared it to my social media yet because I did it late and I wanted to have time to, well, it was late and I had to go to bed. So I just posted it. I didn't have time to get on social media and share it and all that stuff, but I'm going to do that today as well as edit the one I videoed. But if you have watched the first one and you are now watching, you know, the second one, and this is technically the third one, I'm going to mindfully and with full awareness be my own worst enemy right now. And I'm going to bring and draw attention to the coffee mug. Because as I watch my video footage before I post it, so I can, you know, edit and put some fun effects in there. I talked in episode 1 and episode 2 about how I do love effects. Anyone that's been on TikTok knows about effects, and I love them. They're fun, and it's a way that my ADD brain enjoys expressing creativity. And so I will use effects just because part of my YouTube channel will be expressing my creativity with the editing as I learn. But I had mentioned, I don't think I mentioned this in the first one, because it was during the recording of the first one that I picked up on little habits about myself, and that's why this podcast is going to be a tool for me to work on all of my stuff, because when you video yourself, it may seem vain and what's that word when you call someone, well, vain covers it, but conceited. Trust me, that is not why I'm doing videos. But I'm going to draw attention to my coffee because, well, I'd like to take a sip too, but because I noticed in my first video that when I reached for my cup, I was like, pause, and then I took a sip and put it down. Well, because of how my ADD brain works, by me picking it up and acknowledging it and saying, pause, guess what? I paused my brain. And then when my brain gets interrupted, it's done. So when I did my ADD testing with my doctor and therapist, they do some there's a bunch of different tests that they can run to diagnose, but one of which is a computerized test that spits out results and it lets you know what areas you struggle with, and it's just part of how they diagnose you. Well, for me, I scored to the absolute lowest, meaning I'm going to let my negative self-talk have a word right now. I'm going to let my ego hop in and say, shoot. See, now I just got distracted because there's a big old truck coming up on me. Squirrel! That's what everyone always says when squirrels are just like the mascot for people with ADD, because everything distracts you. Yep. So I noticed. See, I'm mentally pausing so I can try to gather and get myself back on track. So I noticed in my first video, I noticed a lot of things, but I'm talking about the coffee cup right now. So when I picked it up and I said pause, I literally I distracted myself for one, but my lowest score when I did my ADD testing is my ability to adjust from task to task. So that affects me in all aspects of my life. It's really bad. My score was really, really, really low, which is why I'm so easily distracted, and that's why I get angry like that with my kids, because no matter what I'm doing when they interrupt me, because that's just what kids do all the time. My kids interrupt me nonstop. I can never get a word in when I want to talk to my husband because they always interrupt me. But boy, I tell you, my daughter, I love her, but she gets really, really upset when anyone interrupts her and doesn't let her speak. So yeah. But for me, because literally, if you could score a 0 on that, I got a 0. I bombed that. I failed that test. So for me, shifting from even little things, tiny things, and big things, I struggle. And since but a big part of ADD is distractibility. Squirrel! That might be my maybe every time I know that I distract myself, I will just say squirrel, and that'll see, yesterday in episode 2, I talked about awareness and some ways that you can learn how to be mindful and aware, like tools. And so for me, every time I distract myself, I'll just immediately go squirrel. Because as soon as I do that, I'm going to be like, okay, focus. What were you talking about? Bring it back in. The things we have to do are a little ridiculous. And that's a big part of my negative self-talk, is when I really started learning and educating myself about ADD, I went into like almost... I went through a very... I don't want to call it depression. I got stuck in anger. Because when you start learning and educating yourself and really seeing your habits and how this ADD affects us, I began to get angry. Because I'd be like, God, why do I have to suck so bad? Why does my brain suck? Why is my brain unable? Like, I was just... And because it affects us all day, every day, from the time we wake up until we go to bed. I mean, like, just, we live and breathe it, because it's just part of our brains are always working, even when we're sleeping. So that's why it's so important to educate yourself and, build a community. And it's really, really, really important to normalize it. And people need to learn to be able to talk about it to other people. Again, I've said this before, you don't need to walk around saying, hi, my name is Ashley Williams, and I have ADD. No, you don't need to do that at all. But anybody who suffers from any kind of mental health condition, I can guarantee you, I'm a little confident in this one, but I am pretty sure they can all tell you that if given the choice, they would hide how their mental health conditions affect their daily lives. If you suffer from severe anxiety and you have panic attacks, you will do any and everything you can when you're in the heat of a panic attack to run, maybe. So no one has to see you go through what happens to you when you have a panic attack. If you have ADD and it manifests into your house looking like a disaster, you won't invite people to the house because you want to hide it. People like to hide behind their mental health, conditions or issues or quirks or how it manifests in them, because they're embarrassed by it, they're ashamed by it. And I am one of those people. Like, when I started learning and educating myself this year, the very first book I listened to was an ADHD book for adult females. I really kind of wanted to jump in on the adult women, because it does present very differently in men versus women. And in this particular audiobook that I listened to, she really jumps in and talks about the shame factor. And that was the biggest initial aha moment that I had, because I didn't even know I had it my whole life until I was 32. So I'm hiding something I didn't even know I had. And that was when I was like, whoa. I had, like, my little tendencies or my things were seemingly small, but no matter what, I hid from them. And I hid them from people, and I didn't even know what I was hiding from them. And so, yeah, the whole learning that you have it as an adult is really difficult. Really difficult. It's very eye-opening. But basically what I'm trying to get at in general, the whole point of that is just that having this podcast, I need this podcast and this vlog on YouTube to help me normalize it for me, because people need to be able to talk about their mental health issues without being judged. Never judge a book by its cover. Everyone knows that one, so I really want people, whether they have ADD or OCD or depression or GAD, it doesn't matter what you're working with. Bipolar, I mean, I only know the big ones. But no matter what you suffer from, I think it's really important to educate yourself about whatever is going on with you. Beyond just going to a therapist, getting therapy, taking medications for whatever you have or whatever you're working with, talking with friends, talking about it is important. Because sitting with your thoughts and emotions by yourself is never healthy. Never healthy. There's a big difference between processing emotions and going through something, because I'm one of those people that I really see, I almost squirrel. I'm going to stop myself. Squirrel. I almost had a squirrel moment, but I'm going to stop long enough until I can let go of the need to talk about that. See, now I just squirreled what I was talking about away on top of what I was going to veer off to talk about. I was saying I'm one of those people that and I really honestly don't remember. So you guys are going to hang out with me for a moment. I'm going to drink my coffee and continue to drive. I'm always focusing on the road. I promise you people, especially my husband, that I am not endangering myself by doing this while I drive. Because I am not focused on the video. If I do look at the camera at any point while I'm videoing, it's no different than the amount of time I would look at the controls to change the radio station. And I also look at it like before we had higher technologies, people still do this actually, and I thought about doing this because I knew that for me to be productive in my podcast or my YouTube channel, because I'm not good at writing and getting my thoughts down, because honestly, when I try to journal, I need to audio journal is basically what it comes down to, because if I try to sit down with a journal, well, first of all, I can't write in a journal while I'm driving, but I do my best thinking. It's like there's just something about the energy of the car is rolling that I'm able to keep rolling with my thoughts and my words. I can't do that when I'm sitting. I can't do that at home, because I could have 100 million thoughts that I want to get down and share with people, but as soon as I sit down with a pen, I get writer's block. I'm not even trying to write a book or anything like that, but as soon as I go oh my god, I really need to tell people about this, I really want to talk about this is important, I'll sit down with a piece of paper and I'll forget everything. So I have actually considered the idea of getting a little digital recorder that I could just have going while I'm driving. But I was like, Daddy, because I've seen it before. I've seen people driving and holding something up and talking. So it is something that people do. Doctors, whatever, people who record themselves. And I'm going to point out that I am a little bit late for work. I tried. I'm not really technically late because we have a 10-minute leeway. But it's 9:05, so I have 5 minutes to go get out of the car, walk up there, clock in, and not be late. So it was nice talking to you, and I'm sure I will do a little bit more I get off work. Peace and love. Talk to you soon. Well, hello, my patient friends. I am headed home. So the wheels are rolling and rolling, which means my thoughts are going and going. Yeah, I'm not funny. I don't know why I try. I really don't. So I did a lot of interesting listening to some new ADHD episodes from the ADHD Experts podcast, which is another podcast that I highly recommend. I will obviously be pulling information that I learned from those podcasts for content on my podcast, but I may not necessarily do clips all the time. I'm just having to evolve this podcast and YouTube channel as I go. I'm a trial and error kind of person. I know best what's going to work when I do it. So that's what I'm doing. So it might be a little bumpy in the beginning, but over time, the bumpies are I already feel the bumps getting a little bit easier because I'm learning a lot. As I learned quickly anyways. My ADD definitely has its hindrances in my life and how I learn, but once I catch on, I'm good. So, and it just depends on what it is as to how quick I learn. Like, at my new job, at times, I felt like certain aspects of my job I felt like I picked up on really quick. Others, not as much, because I also started a new job in the middle of a pandemic. When I literally worked 3 weeks full time before we went to limited schedules, working 5-hour shifts, where they kind of halved everybody in the lab. Half came in the morning, half came in the afternoons. So my training was bare minimal. I had to learn a lot of it. I won't say on my own, but with minimal guidance, and it felt like my first year there, I was making so many mistakes. I learned from them, and I only made one mistake. I had a first for everything in that lab, and right in alignment with how a lot of people who have to navigate through their lives with ADD, a lot of people will lose jobs over the ADD, because when it comes to how it affects our brains and how we have to navigate with it, especially when you're not, if you go undiagnosed, those are people who most certainly will lose probably a handful of jobs in their lives, from the time they're old enough to work until they find that special thing that they really connect with. That's why one of the first things that I learned in the ADHD books that I read with Dr. Hallowell was that one of the most important things that you can do as an adult with ADD, whether you're diagnosed as a child or later in life, he says that he believes that finding the perfect job that you can use your gifts with how your ADD presents, your gifts, that job and that career that is like, like a musician. There's a lot of musicians that have ADD, really good ones. But, whatever it is you do, it's that thing that, like, when you do this thing, you are just in the zone. When you get in it, you are all in it, and 110%. Like, so your career choice is extremely important. And then your partner in life, whoever you choose to spend your life with. And not everybody wants to get married, that's, not to assume that everybody is supposed to get married. But since, innately, we are humans, we are of the, human species, and so I feel like it is natural part of our species to partner up, even if you don't get married. It doesn't matter. Anyways, so squirrel, don't have a squirrel moment, Ashley. But finding that perfect job or career that makes you happy, and so with the partner, obviously we want to find a partner that's going to make us happy, but it goes even deeper than that when you have ADD. Or I feel like I'm going to start saying this at the beginning of all of my podcast episodes or my ADHD vlog diary videos, any videos that I'm talking about ADD, is kind of start that off by reminding people that I will use ADHD as kind of a generic term when I'm talking about ADD and ADHD, because if someone is finding themselves listening to this podcast or my YouTube channel videos, if they already have ADD, they probably are already familiar with the differences between ADD and ADHD. It's just the hyperactive part. Not everybody has the hyperactive presentations. One of the newer episodes, not podcasts, but one of the newer episodes that I listened to at work today, the host, I only listened to it a couple times at work. Repetition, and that's another reason why eventually I will be more mindful and that's why I like doing the videos, because when I listen to my recorded videos, I then learn habits. I have a tendency when my brain is about to say something that it has already said. I don't need to say that. I don't always, before I say something that I've said before, I don't always need to point that out. I know I've said this before in another one of my podcast episodes or blah, blah, blah. That's a lot of time I waste in my videos. And those are the things I'm picking out while I record these and I watch them and I edit them. Even though my videos, unless there's something that I absolutely need to take out, I'm not cutting anything out of my video diaries. I specifically want those to be raw, real, in the moment. They're not live. I can probably do lives at some point if I wanted to, but I'm not there yet. I could. I do lives on my Facebook occasionally, and sometimes I do it on Instagram, just randomly. I don't schedule those things. Part of my ADD brain is that when I get the urge or the push in my noggin to go live on Facebook or Instagram, or eventually maybe on YouTube, it's an in-the-moment kind of thing. That's all I can describe it as. I'll be at my desk and I'll be doing something and I'll be like, you know what? I got a little bit of time and I have stuff I want to say. So that's why I say, like, you know, when you have that when you have the creativity that comes along with an ADHD brain, it's not to say that you cannot be creative if you don't have ADD. I am not saying that. I'm just saying that if you do have ADD, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say when you get into that creative space in your head, it literally comes out of nowhere sometimes. Most of the times, it comes out of nowhere. I can't remember if it was from like a podcast episode I listened to with Dr. Hallowell, or if it was from his audiobook. I can't recall off the top of my head right now. But literally, they talk about, he talks about how when it comes to the ADHD gift of creativity, which, as he puts it, if you take the impulsivity that comes along with having ADD, which a big part of impulsivity is our impatience, or literally just impulsivity. For me, impulsivity looks very different in a lot of ways, you know, and I'm picking up on and recognizing those things. Like, and that's why I can get myself in trouble when I go shopping, because if my husband watches my YouTube channel, he's going to be like, I know. But trust me, I have made a lot of improvements, and I promise that I have never I don't go out and buy cars on a whim. But, like, he will make comments occasionally about how, like, if I say, oh, I gotta run to the store, he'll be like, what are you gonna get? And I'll be like, oh, all I gotta do is go up there really fast, and I'm just getting, and I'll tell him, hey, I just need to go, I don't know, I need to get a bag of sand, because I do a lot of work in the garden. And I will try so hard to just get a bag of sand. This is one of the things that I work on with my impulsivity. And I'm squirreling a little bit here, but I'm going to squirrel, and I'm going to really be mindful about what I'm squirreling away from and come back to it. Impulsivity is what I'm going to get back to, but my squirrel moment is going to just be how, like, for me, impulsivity can look a lot of different ways. But for instance, when I go shopping, I can go to the store because I just need a bag of sand to mix up my own batch of my potting soil that I use for my plants. And I will go in, and I can't even walk in the door of a garden center without, like if your things is diamonds and jewelry, you can't walk into a jewelry store without being like, oh, that's pretty. Oh, look at that. Like, I mean, just, that is me in a plant store. So I will go to the store for a bag of sand, and I'll come home with, like, all kinds of plants. Or stuff plant related, but I have been and this is something I have been working on for years since I've been diagnosed with ADD, is being able to make a list and only get the things on the list. That is a very hard thing for me to do, because the impulsivity I'm talking about is how I end up getting a little crazy when I shop, when I go in a plant store, or if I go into a craft store is another example, because crafting and landscaping are things that I am, like, super duper, I love those things wholeheartedly. So if I go into a craft store, like, say I run out of hot glue sticks, and I'm like, oh my god, I just gotta go to the store and get me some hot glue sticks really quick because I'm in the middle of a project. But everything will catch my eye in a craft store or in a plant store. But I will see something. I will have squirrel moments in every plant store and every craft store. But I'll be going to get the hot glue gun sticks, and I'll see something. And a lot of different things happen when I see something. When something catches my eye, it either catches my eye because it's really cool, pretty, I like the color, whatever. Or I will walk by something and it will be something that I need to do a craft that I saw on Pinterest like 6 months ago. And I've always wanted to do it. But never really scheduled it in my schedule to make this particular craft. So I will then impulsively be like, oh, I have everything else to make blank. I can't think of anything wrong right now off the top of my head. But like, I will see something and I'll be like, oh my gosh, like, I wanted to make this thing and I have all the other stuff and I never started this project because I didn't have this. So then I will buy that and what I went for. But then as I'm there, it's like the floodgates open and I go, oh crap, I also have that other project that I was working on, but I ran out of this. So that happens. And then when I go to the plant stores, I always walk out with something because, again, landscaping my yard and working with the plants is something that I do in my creative brain. So when I go to the store, if I'm just going to get a bag of sand, but I see all of these other things, I will get ideas. I'll be like, oh my god, that plant is beautiful, and I'll look at it because I only work with perennials, and I'll be like 99% perennials because I don't have time or money to waste on buying plants that are going to die every year and I have to replant them. That's silly to me in my brain. So anyways, I'll be like, I'll see something I love, maybe I've never seen it before. First thing I do is look at the tag to see, is it a perennial or an annual? Because if it's an annual, I can walk away from it because I don't want to work with annuals. So if it's a perennial, I'll be like, oh, it's a perennial. And then I'll be like, okay, what kind of light requirements does it need? Because we have a lot more shade on our property because of trees than we do light. So when I buy a plant, I have to look and see if it needs full sun, part sun, and then if it's like part sun, I'll be like, ooh, that would go great here. So like my creative brain will kick in out of nowhere, which is, I'm going to try to bring it back in now. So I kind of veered off with this squirrel moment because I was talking about how Dr. Hallowell likes to flip the impulsivity, which is oftentimes looked at as a negative aspect or tendency in people who have ADD. He was like, but if you can flip impulsivity on its head and turn it into creativity, then we can, do lots of great things with our ADHD brains. And that's very true, but for me, my impulsivity, I have to keep it under control when it comes to having to buy stuff. It doesn't mean that I have to limit my creative potential. It just means that I have to really work hard to go, Ashley, no matter what you see when you go in that craft store, you are getting glue gun sticks. And it is very rewarding anytime I can go to a store and I can stick to my own guns and not buy something that's not on the list. And if I do, I have to really think about if I need it. Those are things that I have to work on a lot to develop better habits. But, so, Dr. Hallowell talks about how when it comes to our creative brain, we can't schedule it. Like, you can't schedule, when you have ADD, you cannot schedule creativity. Creativity is something that when it happens, it happens. And those are the moments where we kind of get sucked into doing something and we can stay up really late or we can really lose track of time. But when that creativity kicks in, it feels it has a feeling to it. And if you have ADD or ADHD, like, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. Because it is also that thing that triggers that. I mean, when I get inspired by seeing something, if something triggers my creativity, I can, like, feel my body, like, producing dopamine like that. And that's another reason why it is such a difficult thing to understand with the ADD stuff if you don't have it. Or even if you have it and you just haven't really educated yourself enough about what it is. because when people think of ADD, they think attention deficit disorder, the inability to focus. And in order to focus, we need dopamine. And so when you have ADD, our brains do not have the ability to produce the dopamine we need when we need it. Like most people who don't have ADD, to my understanding, this is not like a one thing that like it applies to every situation. I'm just saying in general, when you don't suffer from ADHD, your body and your brain are able to signal properly to make dopamine when you need to focus. Whereas in ADD, we just don't produce enough in general. But when we get struck with that creative lightning bolt, we have no control over it because it becomes just a, oh my God, I see something. And then our brain triggers, it lights up in the creative zone. And then the dopamine just starts pumping. I haven't done enough research or education on this subject to really pinpoint exactly why that happens. Why, when I need to do laundry or I need to do anything that I don't want to do, I can't just say, Ashley, you have got to focus on doing this laundry, or you have got to focus on doing your chores, you have got to focus on completing this task. Like, I don't specifically know yet what it is about when that creative trigger happens in my brain or in our brains. I don't know how to differentiate between that and when I need dopamine to focus, because that's what the medication does. So that's why, like, I say often that even though medication is the number one, like, frontline treatment for ADD, but it has to be a combination therapy to manage ADD. It has to be like medication, exercise, diet, brain health, which also means brain exercises, calming exercises, life coach or ADD coaches, or going and actually actively going through like psychotherapy. Tools. It takes a lot of tools on a regular, daily, all-day basis when it comes to having ADD. But part of the functions of the medications that we take are to help us produce the dopamine we need to focus in life in general. But I still don't know how to explain yet how I could be at the end of the day and my medication, I finally have kind of gotten on a dose that at this current time works. And I'm finally able, because I'm working full time again and my schedule's more regular and consistent, I can take the extended release again. So I only have to take it first thing when I wake up, and it's in my system for about 12 hours, which covers most of your day. So I could be home well after the 12-hour period, have absolutely no medication in my system. I could be tired, and this, honestly, this is actually kind of what happens to me. I come home, my meds are pretty much out of my system for the most part by 6 p.m. because I usually, by 7, because I take my medication around 6:30, between 6:30 and 7 in the morning. So by this time is when it's wearing off. And so I will get home and start unwinding, and I will be doing the dinner thing, and I'll be tired. I'll be ready for bed. Like, if I allowed myself to just climb into bed, I could go to sleep. But especially now that I'm in this adjustment period of learning how to navigate life, working full 40-hour weeks, 8-hour shifts a day. I'm only in week 2. A lot of adjustments still. But because I lost 15 hours of my day, of my week, to have time to just do extra things that make me happy. Extra time to study, extra time to record podcasts, extra time to make videos for my YouTube channel. That's why I'm doing this. This is why I'm doing, like, basically mobile ADD. You know, I'm coaching myself. I'm holding myself accountable by doing this. And the more I talk about it and the more I think about it, the easier it gets. And it makes me happy knowing that someone may listen to this and they may hear something they didn't know or whatever. And then just go, oh my gosh, I love that. You know, I never have heard anyone say that before about ADD, and that makes sense based on things that I go through on a daily basis, or my kids. Oh my gosh, I never thought about that. So yeah, that is where I am right now. I'm heading home from work, and I am about not quite halfway, but close to being halfway done editing yesterday's video diary vlog number 2. I'm hoping I can get that done by tonight. If I can keep with the good rhythm. I mean, I'm not committing myself to doing this 7 days a week or anything like that. But when I'm able to, I'm going to. Because, like I said, talking about this stuff helps me. The more I talk, the better I get at talking. I mean, I don't have any problems talking. It's more just learning how to talk clear when in regards to, like, the ADD stuff and how it affects my brain and how organizing my thoughts and structuring things and not getting too squirrely. But I feel like I'm forgetting something that I squirreled away from, and I'm trying to think of what it is. Just remembered. So, one of the podcast episodes I listened to today was a new one. I've been sticking with the same one that I've been talking about, the I'm not lazy, crazy, or stupid. I have one more episode. I'm going to tie that podcast episode information up in episode 6 of my podcast. That will be available, I don't know when yet, when I have it ready. But I am going to just tie that up with part 3, and then I'm going to go into this next one that I started listening to today. It just blew my mind. I'm in one of those headspaces today with ADD stuff where I've heard it now from another. The more people you hear talk about ADD that are experienced, you know, like doctors and therapists, and the woman that I listened to her podcast episode for, that I'm going to kind of talk more about what I'm learning from her in my episode 7, she wrote a book. I don't know if I remember what her credentials are in regards to, I mean, she has ADD, but she talks about how when you, like, there are a lot, when I say a lot, I mean a lot, people who have ADD. See, and I'm still not in the habit yet of picking. I'm so used to hearing different people say it different ways that I'm trying to train my brain to just use ADHD, so I'm not constantly like ADHD. Like, I feel like I say that word so many times now. So I'm trying to train my brain to be more habitual about just saying ADHD, because that covers both. But she talks about how no two people that have ADD look alike either. So getting diagnosed, or maybe even thinking you have it, isn't always gonna look the same. You can't compare yourself to anybody else that has it, because she used this analogy of, like, if you took, and when I say there's hundreds of traits and tendencies that come along with an ADD wired brain, I'm not kidding when I say hundreds, and I say that because in Dr. Hallowell's, one of his 2 books that I have listened to, he has like a questionnaire in there, and he goes well above 100 traits and tendencies, where he'll ask you a question like, do you do this? Or either questions or statements, and you either say yes or no, I don't relate to that, or I experience that, or you don't. So the woman whose podcast episode I listened to today, she was like, imagine like a bag or a hat, like reaching into the hat and pulling out a number. So imagine just taking all the traits and tendencies that go along with an ADHD wired brain, putting them all in a hat, and then having, like, lining up and being like, okay, I'm going to take a handful, and I'm going to come out with 9 traits, and I'm going to look at them all, and I'm going to write them all down. Then I'm going to put them back in there. And then, and then so-and-so is going to come over that also has been diagnosed with ADD, and they're going to reach their hand in the bag, and they're going to pull out a handful of traits. And they may pull out, like, 20. But the 20 traits and tendencies that they have might be totally different than mine. There are some things, now, even saying that, there are a lot of traits and tendencies that are kind of across the board. And when I say that, I just mean kind of like the classic thing is the distractibility, the squirreling, the like inability to really stay focused. So some things like that are kind of across the board. But even though everybody that has ADD has that distractibility thing, the degree of distractibility can vary. Mine is bad. Bad. And the older I get and the more stuff that I pile onto my life, the more distractible I get. So I'm having to work on that. Since I'm in my neighborhood and I'm almost home, the last thing I'm going to say for today's ADHD blog diary number 3. Last thing I'm going to say, just because I thought about this throughout my day listening to that podcast a couple times, and it was that my whole life I've said this before I got diagnosed with ADHD, I'm not in the habit of saying just ADHD yet, and after, but I always have a full plate. And oftentimes I'll say my plate is always full. And actually it's usually spilling over. And there have been times in my life where I was very mindful about my plate, about what was on it, and that it was full, and making time for all these things. But most of the time, when your ADD becomes unmanaged, your plate becomes full or spilling over. And I used to think that was a good thing. I used to think, I don't do well if I don't have a full plate. I do really well when I have a full plate. And things like that. But as I learn and educate myself a little bit more, I start learning that having a full plate is because we very typically and habitually, chronically, start a task and cannot finish it. So, guess what happens? When you start a task, you put it on your plate. When you don't finish it, it stays on your plate. So, if you keep adding things to your plate, but you're not finishing things, then it becomes, the things on your plate are no longer, even if it's things that you love, because most of the time my plate is full of things I love, except for a couple of piles here and there that I need to get through and so forth. But other than that, when your plate becomes full and overfull and you're putting things on it and you're not able to take things off of your plate, that is when it becomes stressful. And as we're learning with I'm not lazy, crazy, or stupid, amygdala, that trigger it is even before the prefrontal cortex, that initial trigger in the amygdala stress. It is controlled by stress. And so that amygdala was created to be able to recognize a stressful situation like, getting eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, even though we don't live in prehistoric times anymore, so we don't have to worry about that. But the amygdala does not have the ability to differentiate between stress caused from being chased by a wild animal and stress caused by our plate being over full. So, I'm really starting to learn now the importance of preventing stress. And it's not easy for anyone. Now, mind you, too, that's why I say, even though I do talk a lot about ADHD, it's not just for people who have ADD. Because you can have a completely healthy and balanced mental health status, but everybody experiences stress. And so, stress is the initial thing that our amygdala recognizes to determine what the prefrontal cortex is going to make decisions to either fight, flight, or freeze. So when you live a life full of stress due to your ADD, guess what? That is why we get called lazy. Because when we experience stress, it doesn't matter what the cause of that stress is. As soon as the amygdala recognizes stress, you're no longer making a choice or a decision that is brain-based. It's emotionally based, and that's usually just run. Because, that means, oh, tiger, run. And that's, one of my previous podcast episodes when I talk about this laundry business. It's because as soon as I let the negative self-talk come in, or as soon as I decide to walk away from laundry, it's usually because something stressed me. It's my husband. Okay, I gotta go. To be continued.